Alright guys, welcome to this video today. In this one I want to speak about something that I would call intuitive training, which is understanding that you really know what you should be doing in your training and you don't really have to kind of like go out and seek everything all the time. And if you can get in touch with that, then it's going to be much more effective for your progression. But what gets in the way are our kind of limiting beliefs. You know, some part of us inside thinks it's not possible for us to do. And then what we do is we end up trying to research methods all the time under the guise of kind of finding what's effective and, you know, being the least time wasting. Now in doing this, you make the mistake of kind of acting from unbelief. So if your starting point is a place where you don't really believe what you're trying to do is possible for yourself, then all you're going to get back is kind of reflections of that state from which you take those actions. The mind is very tricky like this, and what it will do is it will convince you that this research is moving you forward, when more often than not that's actually holding you back and moving you in the opposite direction of where you want to go. Now this kind of like incessant research and lack of action on any particular thing for a consistent amount of time is what I would call acting from a false premise. And it's false because until you actually take action on something and kind of get some feedback from your results, you're not going to know what is the most effective method. Now as a starting point, the most effective way to kind of get in touch with this intuitive sense of the actions that you should be taking is to ask the question, what would the highest version of yourself be doing? Now I did this very naturally when I was a kid. I always watched martial art movies and loved video games like Tekken and stuff, and so naturally I just wanted to move like those people in the movie. And since that was kind of my unconscious goal at that age, you could call it, I would say today I've absolutely achieved that, and in many cases exceeded it as well. So what I'm saying is that I didn't overanalyze the process at that time. I just literally went out and did it. So obviously I did formal martial arts lessons as well, that's not what I'm saying, but I would say the vast majority of the things I did in order to progress to the level I'm at were all things that I kind of like figured out on my own. On that note as well, sometimes kind of going to a school and being so like loyal to a certain system can actually hinder your growth, because the very nature of being in that environment promotes conformity to that system. So you need to adopt a childlike mindset again when you're approaching anything new, because adults just always tend to overcomplicate something. Basically any training program and method that you select is going to be effective if you execute it in the right way. The most important thing that you need to know is kind of the goal and the vision that you're aiming for, and then you just need to go out and train. An analogy that I always really like to kind of explain this is, imagine if you're driving a car at night and you've got the headlights on. The headlights stretch to a certain distance, and that's the part of the road that you can see in front of you, and you're not going to know what's further on the road until you reach the end of where those headlights stretch to. It's exactly the same thing. Unless you start to take some action upon your training, then you're never going to know what's effective and you're not going to know what to iterate on. Who do you think is going to get the best results? The person with access to all the research and knowledge in the world who kind of just sits behind a computer, or the man who just does some push-ups? And this is why those prisoners are just absolutely jacked, because they have little to absolutely no equipment obviously while they're in prison, so they just kind of make do with what they've got. And actually this lack of resources works as a big advantage to them in that situation. Success in any endeavour is generally more about kind of removing things and getting down to the absolute bare essentials, rather than constantly adding new methods all the time. And this is what is called the paradox of choice, where having more options generally makes us happier, but only up to a certain capacity. So there was an experiment done where a store sold different varieties of jams, and on some days they sold only 6 varieties, and on other days they sold 24 varieties. Now the results showed that on the days where only 6 varieties of jams were sold, 30% of customers actually purchased something from the store. But on the days when 24 different varieties were shown, only 3% of people actually purchased. Basically the overwhelming number of varieties made the customers second guess their choices and experience what's called choice paralysis. And additionally, people that actually did buy reported that they were less actually satisfied with their decision. So what can you actually do about this then? Well, you need to bear in mind that obviously having more choices is only going to make you happy to a certain extent. And while some training methods are obviously more effective naturally than others, a lot of this stuff doesn't really apply to the overwhelming majority of people anyway, who'd be better with just kind of picking a basic plan and getting started with it right away and sticking to it. What you also want to do is basically lower the expectations on those choices that you're making. Don't expect too much from them and just kind of work the plan anyway, and realise that any method, even the most effective one that you choose, is only going to work if you apply consistency and diligence to the process. So what your mind will do is lead you to believe that there's this kind of like holy grail method of training that's going to be vastly more effective, 90% more effective than anything else. When really any method is going to be about 85 to 90% effective, and the ones that actually do have a little bit more benefit are only a few percent more. And not only that, but they're actually much harder to implement and aren't really applicable unless you get to a really advanced level anyway. And so you also want to streamline your decision making process. So this means like basically creating a training plan of everything that you're going to do within a week, or even better over a month. And make sure during that plan that you include the sort of length of time that you're going to actually implement these things, and really make sure that you actually stick to that for the allotted amount of time that you said you're going to do. Too many people make judgments way too quickly and kind of decide that what they've started doing isn't working when they've just simply not given it enough time. A week or even 2 weeks is nowhere near long enough to kind of assess accurately whether something's actually benefiting you and moving you forward to where you want to be. You can make this easier for yourself by sort of vowing to just stop this incessant research and just stick to the plan that you've made and follow it out until it's completed. Now, what will inevitably happen is after the kind of honeymoon period has worn off, you'll get that itch again to start researching stuff, especially if this has been an established pattern that you've done in the past. And the reason this happens is because the mind just craves complexity. It can't accept that something as simple as just following a plan. But you'd be surprised at the amount of stress that actually causes you, even if you're not really consciously aware of it. And there is this sort of like peaceful state that can come over you when you've just made a decision that you're going to stick to this plan and you just follow it through to completion. Now, after you've completed that period of training for the sort of allotted time period that you initially set, even if you do determine that something has not been as effective as you initially thought, you will have definitely received some benefit from it, even if it's not immediately apparent. For example, you will have received a boost in mental strength and mental fortitude by proving to yourself that you can stick to something despite kind of temptations trying to pull you off the path, which is just immensely powerful. Further to that as well, unless you're completely insane and you're just literally barking up the wrong tree completely, then the methods that you have selected and you've utilized for that time period will have been effective towards moving you towards your goals. However, they might just need a little bit of tweaking. And for me personally, I can say without a doubt, this is pretty much what's happened to me every time I've tried something out. I don't really think too much about the things I'm doing. If I've selected something that I'm going to do in my training, I'll just go and do it again and again and again. And I'm not sure if it's a personal thing that I just have a kind of ability to just repeat something and not need new stimulus, or because I'm having fun and just enjoying the process, I don't feel the need to constantly look for new things all the time. And lastly, this is a really important one. You want to avoid comparing yourself to others, because it's just going to make you second guess yourself and it leaves your mind in this state of agitation. By making that firm decision that this is what you're going to do and just kind of shutting out that noise, you insulate yourself against all of the kind of outside influences. In my own personal way of doing this, I don't really consume any content from people in this space making similar sort of content to what I'm making, and I get most of my ideas from people who have absolutely nothing to do with martial arts, and then I kind of just draw parallels between what they're talking about and how it relates to my own field of interest. And I do this because I don't want to kind of fall into following trends, subconsciously copying what another successful creator is doing or has found success with. And so take me as an example of this kind of philosophy in action. As I said before, I was a kid who just loved martial arts movies and kind of physical movement in all of these shows I watched, and that just made me go out and train. I didn't have access to any information really, any kind of training methods and things like that, and that's basically how I started out. There's something you'll come to discover about many of the world's most successful people in all different endeavours of life, that they kind of intuitively came to the right conclusions that then fed to them the actions that they needed to take to reach that goal, and then just kind of iterated along the way. So to play devil's advocate in a sense, the only sort of research that I would recommend doing from now on is just to take a sort of zoomed out view, a wide view of loads of different people from all different fields. Try to notice patterns in those person's behaviour and mindset that led them to where they are. And when you're doing this, you're avoiding focusing upon gimmicks and things that kind of come in fashion, in vogue for a time. They're always subject to change, and instead you're focusing more upon principles which are unchanging. So thanks very much for watching this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I like to kind of integrate some of my own personal experiences and like my interactions with people into these videos. Just get started with whatever you have. That is far more effective than researching everything and trying to find out the best methods all the time. You know, like I said, those prisoners just have very limited options, so they just literally work with the absolute bare essentials. They just do push-ups in their cell or pull-ups in the yard, and that's all they do, and they get absolutely jacked. So that kind of proves the point in a sense. Just get started with what you've got and iterate along the way.